I'd now like to introduce today's host, George Havakis. As George is known to most of you, I'll keep it simple and say George is the Managing Director of GISA, as well as Deputy Chair of the CEBA Victorian branch and our most recent addition to the CEBA National Board. Welcome, George.
And George is on mute.
That is the COVID catch cry, isn't it? So thank you, Luke. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our final session, and looking forward to our presenters today. So I just want to do a brief recap. So we kicked off the series to explore if VDAS was a barrier or an opportunity, and our first session had us be introduced to the now Chief Engineer of Victoria, Luke Belfield from Office of Projects Victoria. And he outlined to us the intention of VDAS. So we then heard from Dr. Hayden Reid from New Zealand outlining what is possible by having foundations in place. And this was followed up by our two final presenters, Brenton O'Rourke and Charles Moscato from Wannon Water and Yarra Valley Water, respectively, who gave us a snapshot of what it is like from having boots on the ground. So our conclusion was that VDAS is an opportunity, and it will take a commitment and investment in time to leverage from what OPV have put in place. So we moved on to our second seminar where we explored the differences and requirements of data sharing versus data exchange. And our two key presenters, Brendan McDonald from Warrnambool City Council and David Norris from Southeast Water, outlined the importance to be able to exchange data and the level of work applied to make sure the data was appropriate for the purpose intended, versus sharing data on places such as data.vic.gov, where the key element was to make sure the data was accessible and people knew what it could not be used for. Our third session, we once again saw a representative from Office of Projects Victoria, Oscar Casasayas, a project officer, Evan Quick, Digital Engineering Assets Manager from Rail Projects Victoria, excuse me, Ashley Fenton, Manager Crown Survey Approval, Surveyor General's Office, and of course, Craig Sandy, Surveyor General of Victoria. So this now leads us into our final session. And each presenter who will speak today will talk from a particular inquiry, and I'll introduce that for each of the presenters. But just before I go into introducing our presenters, I really want to acknowledge that each of our presenters, for their contributions they each make to their communities. And this is indicative of their selflessness and their stand for what they believe in is possible. So our four presenters today, we've welcomed back people who have presented previously, and we also have two newbies that we've invited to present today. So we've invited back Luke Belfield, Chief Engineer for Office of Projects Victoria, Craig Sandy, Surveyor General of Victoria and Chair of the Surveyors Registration Board of Victoria, Adam Beck, one of our newbies, Executive Director, Smart Cities Council, Australia and New Zealand, Jennifer George, another newbie, CEO of Nakudu and Chair of IT 268 Committee for Smart Cities and Communities at Standards Australia, and also Dr. Hayden Reid. And Hayden likes to describe himself as just a farmer from the Bay of Plenty, but we'll find out that he's not just a farmer. And our other presenters have also described themselves, everything from casual golfers to avid readers, but you know, what we'll get to see today is some of their vision into what is possible. So moving on to the presentations. Our first speaker today is Luke Belfield, Chief Engineer for Office of Projects Victoria. And, you know, I'm not going to read through everybody's bios so that we can gain a bit more time and have the opportunity for some more questions at the end. But needless to say that Luke is an experienced infrastructure professional with many years of experience, particularly in policy, technology and business strategy. And one of the questions that we posed to him was, how can the surveying and spatial private sector support VDAS? So Luke, welcome to the stage. Over to you.
Thanks, George, and good morning, everyone. Just give me a second while I try and share my screen. Yes, so thank you for the opportunity to come back. Obviously, that means I didn't do too badly on the first time, so hopefully this will be engaging enough for everyone as well. So just as a bit of a recap, let me see if it works to the next slide. Come on, slide. With me. Here we go. Victorian state government has 9 departments. OPV, or Office of Projects Victoria, sits within the Department of Treasury and Finance, which has a central role in providing systemic improvements across all other portfolios. So that's why VDAS makes sense to be within Office of Projects Victoria and coordinating all those other different government departments. This means initiatives we deliver have an impact across transport, justice, education, health, providing system-wide improvements. So in addition to our whole of government perspective, we also deliver technical project support to some of Australia's biggest infrastructure projects being led out of Victoria. And so a big focus of what we do is in implementing Victorian Digital Asset Strategy through our digital build program. So over the past 2 years, we've steadily built a portfolio of work as a foundation. And as you can see right over on the left in March 2020, that's when we launched the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy. But we haven't just been sitting on that strategy and going, that's all we need to do. We've been steadily building our work program over time. And as you can see, we've delivered quite a few different products to support the implementation. And even gained 12 million, I wish it was 20 million, of funding over 4 years to deliver the digital build program. More specifically, today I'll talk to you about the recently released digital asset policy. You can see in the middle, around September 2021, the Victorian Treasurer, Tim Palance, launched the digital asset policy. And just as a bit of a broader perspective around all the different good things that we're doing, within our digital build program, we have our digital assets workstream and our offsite construction workstream. In the digital assets workstream, we've released the digital asset policy, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're also delivering pilots to demonstrate good practice, capture the benefits and share this across government. So pilots in being how the policy can be applied to projects in the government setting. Within our offsite construction workstream, we're delivering policy, guidance, contractual clauses, and trainings to support good implementation of offsite approaches. And for all those newbies or people scratching their heads going, what's offsite? It's an approach to move most, all of the construction activities away from a construction site and move it into a manufacturing environment. A bit like IKEA for construction projects. So the Treasurer released the digital asset policy at the Built Environment Summit in September. There's his face right in the middle there. This policy lays a powerful foundation for digital practice across VicGov construction. The digital build supports the Treasurer's national role for building information modelling implementation, and more specifically, the implementation of that on VicGov projects through the digital asset policy. So it's really taking the good elements of the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy and looking at how to apply requirements that projects need to adhere to for whole of Victoria. And OPV are able to support this through alignment to 2 government policies, the DTF investment lifecycle, which has the normal gateways a project has to step through in the government setting to achieve funding and then to put it out to market and deliver, as well as the asset management accountability framework. The policy itself has been designed to cater for differences in project complexity and value, so that requirements are both appropriate and practical. so that a small project doesn't necessarily have the same requirements as a much larger complex project. And so we're really trying to make sure that that the policy is applied in as efficient way as possible. This project seeks to create a whole of government approach building on VDAS, offering clear, consistent requirements for government departments and agencies. Here is an extract from the construction phase of the DTF investment lifecycle and the policy. As you can see, the requirements for the extract example is graduated according to the project classification and arranged in themes. It has been designed to be easy to navigate using plain English. It's one of our objectives and most importantly, in all of our work, is that we need to make sure that it's in the language that projects know and understand, so that we're not creating new language, or we're not creating language that's in the IT realm, or using something that will be completely lost and foreign on the project teams that are delivering these projects. So the future state. So we want to take the policy into the future state system for our digital project management, a connected data world where we can free up people's time for the things that professionally trained people are best at, and that's the creative thinking, problem solving, and analysis to improve our project. This is what Digital Build Implemented is. It's a separate structured data management approach that integrates our data systems architecture with our people architecture, our organizations to deliver projects. Only then can our data systems become fully automated. And it's important to see this in its context. It's not just focusing on the 3D elements. It's not just focusing on the project management type data like time, risk, cost, schedule. Schedule and time, the same. But it's very important to see data as an integrated set, because once you start integrating those data, then you can create more insights, and you're also removing the duplication or the silos that you normally get in projects. And the data is a lot more valuable and powerful. So for 2022, we've got a bit on. Each quarter, we'll publish work to further the cause of more digital practice and more offsite construction. In the background, we'll be working on our major deliverable, the pilot projects to implement the digital asset policy, and signing agreements with projects to roll them out. And we're hoping with each pilot, we'll provide a case study and also the applicability to roll it out further to other government departments, or even private industry or private projects as well. So for further information, we make all of our information, all of our products publicly available on the OPB website. So it's opb.vic.gov.au. As you can see on the right there, we've got the digital asset policy, Victorian Digital Asset Strategy, and our offsite construction. And we'll be adding to that over time. And so it's a really good resource and really good landing page for people to go visit if you need to see where we're up to, or if you want to see where we're up to. With that, I'd just like to say thank you and good luck on your VDAS journey, and very much open to hearing, to receiving emails and hearing your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Luke. As always, very informative. So I'm going to put you on the spot now, Luke, with a single question, and then we can, when we go into the panel, we can explore it a bit further. Based on your experience so far in rolling out VDAS and these other activities, what are some of the things that the private sector can support the state government with in its adoption of VDAS across different projects?
Yeah, certainly, George. And that's something we're working on. I didn't touch on it too much, but I'd say that I talked about the digital asset policy, which is really the government side. We're also working on standard contractual clauses and requirements. So that's government. So then those policy requirements can then flow right through to the contractor and right down the contractor chain as well. So those requirements and that thinking will be embedded in contracts, but it's a bit like the policy. We need to make sure it's fit for purpose, and we're not asking for things that are, ridiculous. We're not asking for levels of detail that the government will never use, or attributes that the government will never use. So we need to make sure that whatever we specify is value adding. In terms of what the industry more broadly can help with, feedback, adoption, getting on board, telling us how we can improve on what we specified, telling us what we can do better. Really, I think if government and industry work better together, then we deliver better projects, and there's a lot less time lost and efficiency gained in delivering projects, and I think that's really important. So we're going to be focusing on a lot of that relationship between industry and government to make sure that we're really improving how we're delivering.
Okay, great, thank you. And you've given us some extra time, so I've got a couple more questions for you, but just to follow on from mine before I go to somebody from the audience. You mentioned about feedback. Is there a particular way that organisations can give you feedback? Is it who do they send the feedback to, Luke?
Yeah, there's an email, inquiries at opv.vic.gov.au, or get in touch to one of the team or myself. We're always open to feedback. We often send a lot of our products very broadly out to anyone and everyone to get feedback on. We're not precious about our documents. We actually prefer to be challenged on our documents and see, what's realistic and what's not realistic.
Well, you've put the cat amongst the pigeons there, asking to be challenged. So careful what you wish for. But no, that's really great to have that openness to be able to receive feedback. So, Luke, we have a question from one of the attendees, and it's, is government seeking benefits from the digital asset policy yet? If not, what time frame are you expecting?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because we wouldn't be doing something unless we're going to see benefits from it. But I guess with the benefit from digital asset policy or any of this digital work, it's really around efficiency and productivity in projects and less errors. We're hoping to see, as the policy gets implemented, that there is a real-time take-up of that sort of efficiency and productivity. So we'll see different projects stepping ahead a lot quicker than other projects. And that's where our pilots come in. That I spoke briefly about them, but our pilots are really there to demonstrate for specific things that we're looking at, how our intervention has improved a project and that efficiency and time piece, and quality piece. So yeah, we want to do that ASAP, and we need to do it ASAP. We want to really move quickly on this.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. Okay, well, thank you again, Luke. And we're now going to move on to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Craig Sandy, Surveyor General of Victoria and Chair of the Surveyors Registration Board of Victoria. And in prepping Craig for this conversation, we asked him not to talk specifically about surveying, but about the best balance of the challenges of traditional and legacy surveying methods with what is needed to enable VDAS success. So, and other such initiatives. So we've asked Craig to also talk a little bit about what the future looks like in terms of, all this technology that's available. So over to you, Craig.
So hopefully you can see my screen at this moment in time.
Yes, all great.
Excellent. Sorry. Just before I begin, good morning, participants, and thank you, George, for the invitation, and Jacinta, to talk this morning. I'd like to reiterate Jacinta's acknowledgement of traditional owners, and for me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. So I had to think about the question that you can see on screen, and what I did was I came back to the key things that we actually do, and have a look at what we do and the importance of those, and then try to tie it into how we utilize technology and what that means for VDAS. So I've got measure there. So we measure. So as surveyors, we measure. And if you ask most people, that's what they would say. But when we say that, what do we mean? And the key for me is that it's not just the physical aspect of measuring something. It's actually understanding everything about the measurements we take. So it's understanding the tools that we're using, the limitation of those tools, the potential errors that we might get by using those, and how we mitigate those, understanding, optimizing the statistical analysis of it so that we get the outcome that we're trying to achieve, or we get the optimal observation, all those sorts of things. And so when we talk about measuring, we're measurement experts, which means we understand everything about it. The second thing that I've written is that we manage data. And that means that we're looking at it from the perspective of the capturing of it, the analysis of it, the use of it in terms of our decision-making process, and then presenting or visualizing that data for end users. And those two aspects of our role is really important. But the most important part is that we use the measurements and the data to give advice. And for us, we give advice on land. And measurement and data are really just the evidence, or part of the evidence that we use to give that advice. We also have to consider the legal framework and all the other things, our experiences and what we know about the land, to provide suitable advice. And so this is my perspective on this, because we've got to look at the role that we play. What I haven't written up here on the screen is that for us to do all of those things, predominantly these are the technical aspects of our role. And for us to deliver good advice, we've got to develop a lot of skills in the non-technical space. We've got to be able to negotiate. We've got to be able to have relationships with people. We've got to be able to lead. And one of the key things for me is that we need to be able to communicate. And the question talked about legacy, and I think that communication is a legacy issue for us. We have knowledge on data specifications, we understand the importance of our work, and we understand the benefit for our direct end users and our indirect users. The challenge for us is that we need to communicate this to others. And the reason that we need to communicate it is because our end users think they have some understanding of the things that we do. And so they say things that we know are just unrealistic, unpractical, and not possible. For instance, anyone can say, I want you to do a survey to the nearest centimetre. It's very easy to say that, not so easy to deliver and to understand what delivering to the nearest centimetre actually means. And so communicating the impact of an accuracy specification to end users, so that when they write their contracts or they write their request to us, is an important aspect. And it's a legacy that we've had where people don't necessarily understand what that saying the word 1 centimetre might mean. The second part to it is that many users don't understand the importance of our work or the benefit we offer them. We deal directly with people such as engineers or architects, etc., property developers. However, the true end user is the member of the community, the house owner, or the person that may be relying on the advice of those other professionals, but we don't communicate in any way to them the benefit of what we do. How many of them understand the importance of a surveyor in the location, understanding the location and extent which drives our economy? And so it's, you know, to me, the legacy that we've left at this point is that we haven't communicated as effectively as we could. So let's bring this back to balancing the traditional methods with the modern methods, and then I'll get into VDAS. Technology is changing all the time, and over the last 20 to 30 years, we've seen a big amount of change in a short space of time. Changes in technology definitely mean changes in measurement methods. It means changes in the way we capture data and all those sorts of things. And the technology is important. However, for us, the key is knowing our role. And we can have all the technology in the world, but if we don't apply the right principles and we don't apply the best approach, we don't achieve the result we want. The key for us as surveyors is that the outcome is the same. The clients still want to be able to transact land. For them, that's the outcome. Our role is to utilize the measurement, which is part of the evidence, with the data, which is also part of our evidence, and combining that with legislative frameworks, planning overlays, and a whole range of other things, plus our experience, and looking at what the client wants to determine a suitable outcome for all stakeholders. So let's have a look at the digital engineering world. We as surveyors already understand the 3D world. We operate in it every day. The challenge for us is presenting that in a way that those end users that I spoke about can actually use and visualize. We actually work in what I don't describe it as an ND world, but a professor from Melbourne University called it ND. And what he means by that is you have the fourth dimension, time. Some people call the fifth dimension dollars. Others call the sixth dimension environmental impacts. It really doesn't matter how many dimensions you want to have. The fact is that we operate in this world already. The key is for us to be able to demonstrate that by presenting the data or the evidence to people in a format that they can see and they can use. They can interrogate it. They can understand it. To work in this space, to work in the VDAS space, or the digital engineering or digital twin or metaverses, whatever terminology you want to use, the key is quality data. And as surveyors, that's part of our data management, ensuring that data is highest quality, it's meeting the fit for purpose requirement of the project, and it can be used for future purposes. We as surveyor use history to create solutions for today and leave a legacy for the future. And where does that lead in the VDAS space? Well, with all digital engineering projects, it's based on property rights. All digital engineering projects happen somewhere. And it's about understanding the rights, restrictions, responsibilities of those property in not only the digital space, but in the physical space. And that's our responsibility. It's to interpret the digital and ensure that we can locate it in the physical space. Now, I've put this up here, but what I would like to say is I've had some discussions over the last few months, and I've talked to some young surveyors, and even yesterday I was talking to some older surveyors. And one of the challenges is that I hear surveyors saying things like, oh, you know, we can't use laser scanners for cadastral surveys. And my question is, why not? And the reason that I ask that question is because a laser scanner, like a theodolite, like a chain, like a GNSS device, is just a measurement tool. We as surveyors are experts in measurement, and we just have to understand which tool to use at the right time. And then we have to demonstrate that the tool that we have selected meets the accuracy requirement of the project or the regulations that are in place, and apply it to the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So from my perspective, working with VDAS, it's about ensuring that we have quality data for the end users, which comes from the work that we do, which is gathering the evidence to produce the location and extent of rights, restrictions, responsibilities, and provide it using technology to the end users so that they can use it. To me, that sounds like the surveyor's role is still very much the same as it has been. It's just that we're adding technology to aid us in providing that information to the end users. Thanks very much. Open to any questions.
Good-o. Well, we seem to be making plenty of time with our presentation. So thank you both to Luke and Craig. And so we do have a bit of time. So if our attendees have some questions that they would like to raise, please just put them into the Q&A. Okay. So first question from Siddharth for you, Craig. Do you believe some of these communication challenges are seen across other technological fields? And have you seen methodologies put in place in other industries that we could learn from?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think that there are other professions that have the same challenges as us, which is communicating their benefit to their end users so that they understand what they do. For us, some of it comes from the fact that we're surveyors, so we understand the mathematics, we're good at it, and many of our professionals like to play in the mathematical space and don't like to get out and communicate what they do, because they like to be in the back office manipulating numbers and creating solutions, and I get that. However, for people to know the benefits of what we do have to get out there. And so that there are other professions that I believe have embraced this ability to communicate better. You know, it's not hard to have a look on social media or in the news to see which professions get mentioned regularly. And some of it, yes, it's because things go wrong, but some of it is because they're proactive in getting out there and having an opinion and a view on real world issues. And so they voice their opinion and what they believe they can do to solve some of those. And so, you know, we can learn from the engineers. I think we can learn from lawyers. And yeah, you know, lawyers may be considered to have the gift of the gab better than what we do. However, in a profession, and yes, we're a small profession, but all of us have different skills. And some of us are more willing to get out there and talk than others. And so, you know, we just need to have more of us who are willing to give it a go and get out there, because when we do, people listen to us. So there's a lot for us to learn from other professions. I think one of the keys for us is that for us to be recognised, we've got to be out there as a united voice.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for answering that. Craig, next question for you, from obviously from a surveying perspective. you touched on some of the challenges to a successful implementation or successful delivery of VDAS. What are some of the key things that we need to take into account, do you think?
Well, I think Luke's mentioned many of them. So it's collaboration, it's working closely between government, private sector, and when we start to do that, we can start to see the benefits. So we're doing some work in some of the major infrastructure projects, such as level crossing, where we're considering ways that we can bring all this together. So we're going to work with Luke's team, we're going to work with the various contractors and consultants in the level crossing projects, and we're going to try and bring this together to demonstrate that, you know, often there's a capture once, use many. However, in some of those projects, that's not what's happening. The other challenge that we've got to deal with is that largely surveyors have kept a lot of their data to themselves. Yes, we deliver our final plan or our survey data. However, underpinning that is a whole range of other data that we've captured. And so we've got to start considering sharing all of our information, because that now has value to other people. And that's part of being in the digital world, is that it's easier to share that. And so these are some of the things that we as surveyors need to embrace if we want to achieve some of the outcomes that Luke and his team want to achieve with VDAS.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks very much for that. We'll, just as a warm up to get you into the panel session a bit later, so thank you for answering those. Up next to discuss what do we need to do beyond standards and data to achieve the goal of smart cities is Adam Beck. So we've asked Adam to talk from a perspective of what do we need to do around this area once we've gone past standards and data. And you know, I've had the pleasure of getting to know a little bit about Adam through his work through smart cities and a couple of the committees that we sit on. And you know, there's a lot that Adam brings to this conversation, and hopefully we'll get to see some of that during this presentation. So, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Adam is the Executive Director with the Smart Cities Council. And an interesting fact says here, he works with the world's longest running smart cities organisation, focused on catalysing action and investment in technology and data to accelerate livability, workability and sustainability. So with that intro, I'd like Adam, please take the stage and commence your presentation.
George, thank you. Just a quick confirmation, you can see my title slide there, yes?
Yes, all good, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, George. I too would like to start by acknowledging the First Nations people as the original inhabitants of the land at which I'm participating in this event today, which is in Brisbane. And I want to recognise the land north and south of the Brisbane River as home of both the Turrbal and Jagera nations, and pay respect to their elders past, present and future. I'd like to set a bit of a context to this swift presentation that I'm going to give. George has kindly given an overview of what the question or the title is, and I thank him for that question. You know, what do we need to do beyond standards and data to realise the vision and aspiration and ideals that we have around smart cities? And the timing of that question is really good. As you mentioned, George, the Smart Cities Council has been around for quite some time. This year, we celebrate our global 10-year anniversary. We were born in Seattle in late 2012. But in the region in Australia and New Zealand, where I'm Executive Director, it was our 5-year anniversary last year. So last year was a somewhat in the background, a reflection year as well, as we sort of primed ourselves for sort of the next decade of evolution that we're going to have to we're going to have to sort of embark on, and I don't have the answer to that yet, but I'll let you know. So I really appreciated that somewhat provocative question, because for the last 5 years, I've done nothing but all day, every day talk about tech and data. Now, those that know us and what our mission is, of course, it's all about tech and data, but it's absolutely nothing to do about tech and data. It's all about sustainability, livability, and workability, but it's all about tech and data, if you know what I mean. So I'm not going to go over smart cities at all. And, you know, there's an element to this job that is really, really frustrating, because it's a nudging agenda. It's a transformation agenda. It's sort of trying to convince people that you kind of got to do it this way because we think it's better. So it's a hard job, as many of you know, and you're all doing fantastic work across various sectors. So I considered the question, and I thought to myself, you know, I gave a presentation a while back, and I was given a very provocative challenge, which is to give a presentation about smart cities, but don't talk about smart cities at all. And I kind of felt that this challenge and question sort of aligned with that. So I went into the archives, and what I've done is I've pulled out that exact presentation. This presentation is 5 years old. I presented it to the leadership, quite a large leadership team at GHD, the consulting firm. I was a guest speaker at their internal leadership summit. It was over in Auckland, New Zealand. And look, you know, excuse the graphics and font, you know, everything's a little bit 5 years old, but the content, I think, is sort of still very relevant today. And I think, George, it really speaks to sort of the question and challenge in that sort of topic and title that you've shared. So I'd like to share this presentation. I also knew, given the fantastic lineup of speakers today, that our guests, our attendees, were going to get plenty on digital engineering, geospatial innovation, and data and the like. So I thought I'd divert a little bit. So bear with me while I share these views, because I still think they ring true today. So in that title slide, this idea of globalization was sort of a mashup of a few things that came together. And I highlighted in the presentation sort of 5 topics and trends that I thought were critical to smart cities' success. And let me go through them. Now, remember, this is 5 years old. The pilot project is back, and let me sort of just speak broadly to pilot projects. We love pilot projects in the smart cities world. Some may go as far as we're sort of addicted to them. Piloting is really important. You know, allows us to test and fail and do things again, see what might work. And through the support, particularly in Australia, over the last sort of 4 or so years, we've had many grant programs that have been critical in stimulating the smart cities marketplace. We had the Smart Cities and Suburbs program administered by the federal government here, $50 million over sort of 3 to 4 years, over 100 pilot projects of all different shapes and sizes, cities testing out different ways in which tech and data can sort of help solve their urban challenges. And then more recently, and still underway, New South Wales, the more recent sort of level of government investing quite heavily in sort of somewhat pilot projects, but also scalable projects through their Smart Places Acceleration Fund. So no shortage of smart cities pilot projects that have been executed over the past 4 to 5 years, and of course still underway. This wasn't a pilot project. This was a real life project. And what I'm doing in this presentation, given that I delivered this in 2016, I was only back from the United States after living and working there for 3 years. So all of the examples today pretty much are US-based examples. This is the Southeast False Creek Olympic Village for the Vancouver, Canada Winter Olympics. Wasn't a pilot project, ended up being a massive pilot project. It was a real project that had to be delivered. And it became the city of Vancouver's real test bed for doing a whole heap of great sustainable city building. Their first application and sort of scaled approach to district scale, water management, district energy system, green roofs policy, public art program, a whole heap of fantastic city shaping, urban design, urban planning investments undertaken. But what I like most about this project, and why still today I think globally it is the best pilot project ever, is because of what happened afterwards, which was they went away and said, okay, based on what we learned, what policy do we need to change? And there was a concerted effort to review all of their existing citywide policies to identify where they need to change them. And what happened in the wash-up was that in total 9 policies, either existing policies were amended or new policies were created directly off the back of this project. And so for me, that is the true pilot project, where we set out to deliberately change policy for the good. And this is an excellent example. And then I got the chance to work on 14 pilot projects across North America. And this one up in Seattle, the Capitol Hill Eco District was one that was dear to my heart, because it was very much focused around social equity and racial justice and neighborhood-wide sustainability, food security. So a very rewarding sort of thematic and topical area. But again, what I liked here is the city passing a resolution that what they're doing here is going to change and influence based on the outcome of the pilot project. So what do we need to do, George? Going back to the question, the title, what do we need to do beyond standards and data to realise smart cities? We got to do good pilot projects that change policy. You know, our database at the Smart Cities Council it's in the mid 200s of pilot projects, smart cities pilot projects across Australia and New Zealand that have been delivered or are being delivered at the moment. How many of them are doing that through a policy lens with a deliberate political commitment to amend policy for the better? Not too sure how many I could sort of muster up there in terms of counting, fingers on my hand. So we really need to have that policy commitment rather than just sort of a commitment to test some things out. In Portland, Oregon, where I was based, we had a whole number of these pilot projects across the city, and each and every one of them sort of had a different flavour, if I can sort of describe it that way. Down here on the waterfront, it was around green roofs. At Portland State University here, it was around electric vehicle urban infrastructure. We had the Pearl Eco District, which was around urban design, and the Lloyd Eco District around energy. And we had others out in neighbourhoods around food security and social equity. So all different themes, the city deliberately looking at how they upgrade and prepare to build planning policy for sort of, the next decade, so to speak. So pilot projects, we've got to get serious. The second one is interaction with the community. And this topic comes and goes with respect to smart cities. A lot of critics of smart cities go, the community's got no idea what smart cities are. And, how do we get, them to have their say and their vision? And there's a lot of talk about community engagement. It's very important. And we use this word, I think a lot of the time without kind of really understanding what it is. We all want community buy-in, right? I don't think anyone would disagree with that. But there's community buy-in, and then there's community buy-in. And I got the chance to work with Erin Barnes here, who's at the podium from IOBI, a non-profit startup sort of tech company. They kind of did the whole crowdsourcing, crowdfunding thing before it became popular. IOBI stands for In Our Backyard, which essentially means we want to do great projects led by the community in our own backyard. But the IOBI platform is one that actually gets community buy-in, in that the community funds it. That's right, not government. The community funds projects. And this is potentially very US-centric, but I think the principles still apply here. And here's one project. This is probably one of my favorite out of hundreds that IOBI was working on at the time, way back then. It was pitched as the Roundhouse Revival. The Roundhouse is this massive sort of civic centre that you can see in the background, and it was scheduled for demolition. It had been closed down for many years. The city couldn't afford to keep it running. And, you know, this place has held concerts with the likes of Elton John and other international superstars. And it was going to be blown up and, you know, essentially become a pile of rubble and future development potentially coming in. So the community wanted to have a bit of a rally and celebrate the sort of the end of an era. So through the IOBI platform, the community raised a whole bunch of money and set up this fair, and they enticed out of retirement all of these old rock and roll wrestlers that used to compete at the venue. So it was just sort of a beautiful way in which the community kind of owned this project. They had pride. They you know, were really feeling strongly about the vision of their community, and it was true community buy-in. And I don't think we necessarily use those words with the true intent here in Australia around engaging and getting community buy-in. And, you know, this is what it's like. The community come up with projects and they fund it. And it's been hugely successful over there. So a real acknowledgement that government does great things, but government can't do everything. And we always want the community involved. And I think this is sort of a really nice way to do that. And so we've always advocated at the Smart Cities Council that sort of really getting that genuine buy-in in smart cities projects is something that we're still lacking. So again, back to your question, George, what do we need to do beyond standards and data? Well, we need to really get the community involved in this agenda. The third one, it's not an infrastructure project. So I had the opportunity to work on the California High-Speed Rail project. It's a monster of a project. For those that don't know it, it's high-speed rail, ultimately all the way down to San Diego and up into San Francisco. The box is built in San Francisco. The first phase from sort of Palmdale through to Merced in the middle there was where I was working in the beautiful sort of, you know, California Valley there. Construction, of course, underway. It started at Fresno and it's sort of building out. I got the opportunity to work on this project, not from an infrastructure perspective, but the government felt that, well, while we're spending billions and billions of dollars putting in high-speed rail, let's really sort of leverage that investment for a lot more than just awesome high-speed rail. So we were part of a team that I was leading that had to execute on the brief, which involved creating conditions that could capture value from that investment outside of the rail corridor, leverage the investment, and we had to look at community leadership, new methods of collaboration among the community and business owners, come up with a governance model for future land use and development around each of the stations, and then create a set of sustainability metrics that would be used to screen all future development outside of the corridor. So it was a fantastic project, and you know, we talk a lot about infrastructure projects levering community benefit and value and sustainability outcomes and placemaking, and we all know Infrastructure Australia's new sort of mantra there. So it was a fantastic project, and I still think that linked to the previous point that I made around community buy-in, I think there's still a lot more that we can do in terms of particularly collaborative governance, not just community engagement, but new governance mechanisms, setting up new nonprofits and entities that can be there for the long term. I think we're seeing some great work, to be brutally honest. I think the The level crossing removal project in Victoria is one of the best examples, but I think there's a long way to go. So I think this collaborative governance idea sitting behind smart cities is a perfect opportunity as well. I don't exactly know what I was talking about with this one in terms of that title, but what it was speaking to is this idea that let's totally talk about tech and data around smart cities, absolutely, but let's focus in on what that might look like for our communities most vulnerable. And this was sort of work that we launched under a campaign called Compassionate Cities, which directly highlighted work and case studies and innovation where tech and data was deliberately being deployed for the purposes of lifting up opportunity for our communities most vulnerable. And we always talk about the idea of, you know, smart cities being human-centered. And I think we like that idea. We like hearing that and we like saying that, but we've still got a long way to go to make sure that this agenda is benefiting our communities most vulnerable. And if we're not lifting up opportunity for their lives, dare I say it, I'd almost say that our smart cities efforts are sort of failing if we can't change the lives of those that really need it. As I said, our Compassionate Cities campaign was then launched and a whole heap of documentation was created. The final one, and sort of this was the final point that was more of a thought bubble than anything 5 years ago, was there's got to be a different way that we do streets. And the idea there was that when you look at plan view, up to 30%-ish of our urban areas are covered by this black asphalt stuff. And the right of way in our urban areas is quite large and there's a lot of opportunity. And when you look at any local government budget, usually in the top 5 spend items per year, there's usually stuff in the public realm in our streetscape. You know, some cities spending $9 million a year just to temporarily sort of fill potholes. So we've got a lot of opportunity in the public realm, shaping them as productive networks that are service oriented, and the public realm is where people interface with government a lot. And we think that it could be really transformative tissue within our communities. And we went on to do a whole heap of other stuff after that. But George, look, that's a little walk down memory lane in terms of beyond standards and data, what we might need to do to achieve the smart cities vision. That was just a little set of musings that I thought I'd share.
Adam, thank you. That was a terrific presentation, and you know, your presentation really embodied to me what smart cities is all about, which is healthy communities. And thank you for showing us that. It's really given me a different perspective about what is possible, given that we're so hell-bent on getting things right with data. Now we can see why we're doing that. So thank you. Okay, so I think we've got a poll. Fran, are you about to launch a poll for people to respond to just before we get on to Jennifer? Oh, there it is. Oh, that's a really interesting question. Be good to see what the results are of that. So please, please go ahead and answer that. We're really interested to see what your perspective is around our goal of smart cities. And, you know, and I've got a couple of questions also for Adam during our panel session, and we also have one from our attendees. But while you're answering that, I'd like to start by introducing to you Jennifer George. And look, if I was going to introduce and host a seminar on sustaining aliveness and energy, Jennifer would be in my top 5 of presenters. You know, so you know, I've had the pleasure to not only get to know Jennifer professionally, but also work with her on committees on Standards Australia, and really just get to see, like, she's just a ball of energy. And it's our pleasure to have you on our breakfast seminar this morning, Jennifer, and giving us an entrepreneur's perspective of what's the kind of mindset that we need to go into to leverage from the kind of work that Office of Projects Victoria has put in, and as well as other agencies. So Jennifer, over to you.
Wow. A ball of energy. That's really hard to live up to. Perhaps at breakfast time I should be a bowl of energy. So thanks everyone, and I'm really pleased to be joining. Let me just set up my presentation here. And 1 second. I think we're there. I think we're there. Can everybody see?
Yes, can
Excellent.
see that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for my the prior speakers. I'm so privileged to be here because they're so highly esteemed and covering such important areas. I'm seeing a common theme of collaboration and communication. That's really great to see, especially from an entrepreneur's point of view, because conversations have to be broad in order to bring value. Right? Entrepreneurs are part of that. I remember when I worked in finance, people used to talk about their diversified portfolios, and they'd say, well, your portfolio is not really diversified if you put a whole lot of equity in there. What you have to have with a diversified conversation is a whole lot of different kinds of people coming from a whole different types of industries. And so I'm really pleased to be able to speak from the perspective of the innovator and from the entrepreneur in this presentation, giving that diversified view. But first, I'd like to acknowledge, like my host, the traditional owners of the land from which I live and work, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. My presentation will be about past, present, and future because I have to cover off on the topic of change. So change and how the entrepreneur might an entrepreneurship might apply to change. That is a way of thinking. So my short presentation, I will speak on the idea of change, not just from the technology point of view, but from attitudes, how attitudes have changed and how that is a to and fro of changing our technologies to bring everything in alignment, and give you a few thoughts that might inspire you for the future of things that we're working towards. So one of the things about an entrepreneur is that they have a future view. They're always looking at the future. So because developing companies takes time. So if I were to work in today's technologies, by the time I got it ready, it would be too late. I'd be already superseded. So always keeping close to that cutting edge of that future view is very important. So I think the takeaway that I want you to get from this, and I hope you do from my next few slides, will be about this future vision and how we're going to expedite growth and have a social context for that growth. And just like each of the prior speakers that I've heard today have talked about that communication community, bringing people on board and making sure that they feel that they're part of the journey for this. So I'm just going to do this in 3 areas. I've worked in about 50. So I know that there's, hundreds of different opportunities where innovation does occur. But I'm just going to focus on 3. And so those 3 are environment, mobility, and data integration. So let's just start with the idea of entrepreneurship. So this is my first slide, which is about the past. And from that, I want you to think about what it is to be an entrepreneur. And are you an entrepreneur, or is it just something that entrepreneurs do? And from my point of view, I see entrepreneurial thinking as an important thing that we have to understand, is that it exists everywhere. But it's not ubiquitous. There are different types of personalities, and some people want to change things and always see a vision of the future and how things could be better. They are typically the entrepreneurial thinkers of the world. And if you are one of them, you will know it, because you'll always be thinking, well, we could do this or we could do that. So it's entrepreneurial thinking. Whereas if you are to become an entrepreneur, you'll have a much higher risk tolerance. You'll put your entire passion and your vision and your energies behind developing a company or several companies, and you'll be wanting to bring that to fruition, and you'll put your money in and perhaps other investor monies, and you'll build a team, and then you'll take that technology to the fore. So in this first slide, I want to talk about it's a bit like what Adam was talking about, the projects, the pilots. In this first area, I'm going to look at the past. In the past 3 to 8 years, we looked at a lot of pilots, a lot of single projects come out. We had people doing LiDAR, 3D modeling, Internet of Things, 2D cadastral, vendor-based data collection and visualization, but it was all on single projects. As Adam showed you across Portland, there was mobility here, food processing there, autonomous vehicles. All of these things were in different silos back that kind of way of thinking was really reflective of the newness of the technology. Right now, though, there's much more of a push for environmental collaboration. Prior to this, environmental technologies it was important, but it wasn't urgent. Now, environmental technologies are urgent. Circular economy is very, very important. And renewables, although I could still call them the wild, wild west, because they are still developing, and there's all of the scalability of those areas have to be worked out. We're also seeing that there's, digital transformation was seen to have a cost. Now in the prior world, now the digital transformation is seeing, well, okay, how can we actually add value to our customers? But it still costs something, but and it's still the end. The digital is the precursor of development. But let's look at it together as more connected system of systems, items, so that we can look at the data quality. Once you start putting things in my entrepreneur world, once you start putting things together, once you actually dig into an innovation, then you actually start to find things that do and don't work. And it's not until you actually do that you're able to dig in and find the opportunities. Because for entrepreneurs, the one thing about them is that they look at anything that's not quite working properly and say, oh, there's an opportunity to build a company, or there's an opportunity to grow. And so it really took this first level of looking at all the technologies and then digging in the systems to systems for us to start thinking about where the opportunities are. And certainly there's opportunities in connectivity now, of digital twins, of customization. There's opportunity to bring renewables into the systems thinking, whereas before they might have been separate projects. Now we're starting to think of them in a more connected way. Of course, that brings challenges, because we have to understand interoperability. We have to understand that we can't put in redundant systems. The security is really, really key. And we have to look at price. So I'm in my other world, I'm a commercialization person. So price is absolutely critical, making sure that we build fundamental systems that work, right? We cannot build a system. That's the beginning of sustainability. It has to be financially viable. If you build something that doesn't last, if we're left with legacy, stranded assets, then that's not sustainable. Everything has to work at a price and be able to have something that works financially over time. So that's where we are now. But then I wanted to take you a little bit into the future. And the future is where I hang out, because I am always working on the cutting edge. And as George mentioned, I'm always excited by the world I'm working in. Yeah, it's just thrilling to be part of seeing what's going to happen. I don't feel, sometimes people say that, that's not really where the world is, but like I say, entrepreneurs have to have this future vision. If we don't have a future vision, we are actually building systems for now, which are redundant by the time that they are actually built, right? So you've got to be always looking and striving for the future so that we can build the data projects for the future. So in the future, I absolutely see that ESG will be part of mainstream business. We have, I think it's $130 trillion is earmarked for ESG innovations for the next year or so. We need to be able to, that's globally, of course, not in Australia. We need to be able to think of integrated solutions, not think about technologies in silos, as I think Craig mentioned was one of his goals as well. Let's not look in silos, but make sure that we are working with integrated information and how we can get more out of that. So, sorry, just a sec. So, yeah. So looking then to the future, we have we've made significant progress on electric vehicles. We have charging and the three different types of charging options are being in the market now. We've got challenges around where Australia has unique challenges around where are we going to put our charging stations, how our journey is so long, how are we going to be able to implement electric vehicle charging, but we need to sort that out. We have autonomous vehicles. So progress has been made on autonomous vehicles. Geospatial modeling will be an essential part of that, because as vehicles rise and we create an altitude in our drawings, in our modeling, the model becomes the management system. And that's really important to understand, is that in the past, the model was only the precursor to a physical product, but now the model becomes actually the way we are modeling and working with the actual environment. So we're going to start to have the interconnected sensors. We'll have a whole system of charging and flying vehicles, etc. To save on weight, the vehicles will save on. Sorry, to save on weight here, the vehicles will be autonomous. And once we have scale, we'll be creating these secure flight paths for vehicles. So if you think flying vehicles are in the future, yay, Jen, you're off your mind, right? That Star Trek world, it's not. Last year in November, 3 flying vehicles companies listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Each one of them had $1 billion valuation. There are 200 companies making flying vehicles or flying taxis. What they're doing is they're developing all of these technologies, understanding that the geospatial mapping that they will need to navigate and securely maneuver through this three-dimensional world will be developed around them. So that's where geospatial will be going, up in altitude. So the cadastral work that's been done in 2D over the past year will soon become a 3D cadastral, will show all the different levels. And I guess I'm talking in the future here, but that's the kind of thing. And geospatial will be the visionary. So in the past, geospatial has been the product, the precursor to development. In the future, it will be the development. So it's important that we start to look at the metaverse and metaverse data, that native situations where transactions are actually going to be made in the metaverse. People will go and shop and walk through a shop and make sales in those particular 3D spaces that we create, and have conversations with in various areas. This technology, this drawing here that we have here on the retail area was from H&M, and it was produced last month for a metaverse retail space where people get, it's only metaverse, it's not anywhere else. So you can have a 3D space or a 3D image that you've created that creates a whole new vision of the world. So you imagine if in the cities that you're able then to have a conversation in Starbucks, and Starbucks will support your or sponsor your metaverse land, what you've created in the stratosphere, in the metaverse. So the idea that we're actually going to create in the future brand new sensations, and geospatial will be really very highly critical to that creation. So I know that geospatial has been in the past a precursor tool for real, but in the future, geospatial will be creating their own reality, and they'll be creating incredible value. So it's important that we all realize that we are part of this future, and that we're inspired by it, and that we have a good understanding of things that we can deliver in terms of being an entrepreneur. So sorry, just stop to share. So the last, I don't know if so the last thing I just want to recognize that entrepreneurs represents a way of thinking, and it relates to a risk of our capacity to build resources towards the future. And we have to understand that standards take time and innovations take time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jen. That was, I know that you took a bit of extra time, but I didn't want to cut you off because it was so interesting what you were presenting.
Thank you.
Yes, you're very welcome. And I've got lots of questions, but I'm going to leave them for the panel right now. And just now you would have seen on your screen your next poll question for everybody to answer. So while you're responding to that, please, I'm going to introduce Hayden. So Hayden, Dr. Hayden Reid from New Zealand, has presented for us previously, and we've asked him back because Hayden is one of these entrepreneurs. He's always looking at how to do things, and he's not a pure geospatial person. He's not a pure manufacturing person. He's a person that just looks at solving problems for communities. And I've had the opportunity to work with Hayden, and just to get to see where his mindset is, and it's very hard to keep up with, a little bit like Jen. And Hayden will tell you he's just a farmer from the Bay of Plenty, but we're about to see that he's not. So over to you, Hayden.
Kia ora, everybody. I guess you can turn me on, eh?
Yes. Can you share your screen, please, Hayden?
I'm just doing that now, mate.
Thank you.
You guys see all that now?
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Fine. Hey, again, George, thanks for the opportunity to have a chat, I suppose is the way to put it. So I've been hanging around infrastructure for a long time, as George knows, and I've really been involved now in big data analytics and deep learning, machine learning. But what I've kind of figured out with a bunch of folk over here in NZ is that every infrastructure investment is about improved social outcomes. What I often say is, you know, every water pipe and every wastewater pipe is actually put in the ground for a health outcome. We just kind of don't normally measure it like that. So there's been a big sea change of thinking over here around what is the real socially constructed outcome we've been seeking within an infrastructure investment. And you might know some of the stuff, and I'll just go through the foundations really quickly. You need data, you need standards, you need systems to hold information, and you need analytics to give effect to those kind of aspirations, I suppose, to look at for the insights that you're seeking. And in actual fact, what you really need to do is need to make sure they all line up, because without that, that systemization of the information realm, or whatever you want to call it, because it comes in lots of guises these days, you really are on the back foot. And in actual fact, in order to get on the front foot, you kind of have to go and play in this paddock. These are all about interdisciplinary models these days, and you know, you've got to be able to take that information and think about money. And you know, I guess, you know, you mentioned that earlier. You need to understand the spatial planning environment, and you need to understand the engineering of the things that you're doing in terms of systems, in terms of communities, with respect to all of the elements of the system all at once, so you get a good outcome. I was over your way pre-COVID, and it was very topical. And I even saw a TV program, so I took a slight screenshot of it at the time. And you know, this conversation is really echoed in a whole lot of fora on both sides of the Tasman. So you know, we're keeping good company. What's really interesting is if you've got a good understanding of asset data, let's look at that at a cohort of information. There's actually other cohorts of information that you need to understand in a complementary way. We have a thing over here called the spatial data infrastructure, and that's probably the equivalent of location data, which is standardized by the Open Geospatial Consortia, the international standards around that space. We have a thing over here called the IDI, which is really about all the information, individual data information about health, education, justice around our people in this country. And we hold that obviously in the state sector. And there's a tool and an information capability to dig into that, to have a look at it. And then of course you've got the asset data, and George and I, we wrote the asset data standards for New Zealand for 3 waters. That's water, wastewater and stormwater, residential housing like commercial buildings and roading. And that's all the transportation assets at a component level. So you need that kind of level of granularity. But again, you also need to understand that you're actually talking about who, what, and where. And again, you also need to understand the relationship between those pieces of information, so you can actually think about things like smart city, about analytical interrogations and interpolations on top of any one of those worldviews that you could easily take as a person, as an asset, or as a location with respect to the things in it. The wow is always in the how, so you need to understand what the primary keys are of the information within those data sets to give effect to understanding the interoperability between them. And look, next question is, why do you bother doing all of that? Well, it's all about public value. You know, most of us have been or are making our way, looking after communities in whatever way we choose that. Some of us are public servants, others are private sector who support public servants, but it's actually always about the community. The why when we do it, we obviously do it through time. Ultimately, for us, it's always been about a productive New Zealand, lean, agile, aligned, efficient, and effective, which in turn leads to healthy communities. And it is sector agnostic. In other words, you've got to be able to do these kind of analytical derivations over any number of sectors within our communities. And it goes back to why again, public value, and so you go around and around the circle. So it's not just data about our cities then, is it? What we're finding out is we need to understand data about our communities and the social outcomes that we're seeking. And what's really interesting is if you can see these circles here. If you look at our state sector, you've got the Ministry for Social Development, Department of Internal Affairs, Housing Corp, Local Government New Zealand, NZTO, National New Zealand Transport Association. So these are all the state sectors and all the different assets or services that are provided across the government to our communities around New Zealand. I want to demonstrate the point in an extreme, just to demonstrate the point. This is our traditional view. So if we have a pedophile who comes out of prison, there's no doubt we've got justice information, that's Ministry of Justice information about that person in our IDI. Now they're reformed, right? But they also need some support from the Ministry of Social Development, which is probably the equivalent of your work and income or something similar over there. So that government agency will also have data about that person. Maybe they're on an education pathway. Maybe they're doing a trade or something similar. So the Ministry of Education will have information around them. They will possibly need a house from Housing Corp New Zealand. So that's an asset. So the first three are around the person. The thing about the house is about where they live. And if you want to put them somewhere, make sure you don't put those people next to a school. So there's some poster children examples of where the government, because they're working in silos, didn't actually create the right circumstance because they didn't have access to all of the social information at once. Code 4, we need to rethink about the lens we have and the information sets that support good investment decisions to make sure that we keep people safe, no differently than we would if it were talking about an asset. But the use of the asset, the social outcome that it's obviously intended to provide. So this is the first steps of what I would call a digital twin. A real digital twin is having all that information able to be accessed and used. See, it's the same model. Analytics in cities, data comes in 2 or 3 lenses, strategic data, technical data, and operational, which is real time. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Different static models, dynamic models, and real-time models. And we're operating all of these now these days. But the real problem is you're trying to do that, right? There's that much data out there. It's pretty hard to breathe. It's pretty hard to drink. So creating a digital twin might be data rich. It's actually pretty much insight poor. And we're really insight poor. So how do you put all this together? So I've been doing some work with the First Nations people here and looking at mapping complex adaptive systems for social health outcomes. And what's really interesting is if you take how we do things and how we look at stuff in a systematized way, the whenua moana, that's just the land and the sea, the Māori words for those. So you've got land and sea, you've got infrastructure that supports the First Nations people in what you might call their rohu or their reservations, and the people themselves. But if you want to intervene or have some intervention logic around certain pieces or parts of their communities, and whānau order is about health, that's the Māori word for health. Often if you see the red box bumped up on there, we have programs of work that point to individuals, and you get health outcomes through certain programs with a social return on investment of a type, right? But actually, in the construct of a wider view of this, Actually, if you understand that the land is connected to infrastructure, so this is their place. If you take a sector, say tourism, an infrastructure element, e.g. investment in a hotel which we own, you can easily, as we all do in the city space, determine return on investments for those infrastructure elements. But you can also see how it's connected to the individuals with social development for employment. You can analyze social return of investments off an initial investment in a tourism and hotel park by program. And you can also do things like education programs for things like trades training. You can do things like for hoteliers, you can do things for sommeliers, whatever your choice is. You can see how it's in the ether of the system and where it connects, and the value proposition that infrastructure plays in a social outcome. So we're just about to build a $40 million spat hatchery in Te Kaha, which is up the coast from where we are. And that's about the sea, and one is the sea, you might have seen the movie. And it's sea space, so we've got aquaculture farms and seaweed and mussels. We've got a spat hatchery we're building. We are really aware there's an iwi benefit, and there's individuals within the iwi benefits. Again, there's education and social development outcomes. So when we put a business case to central government for $40 million to build this thing, all of the stuff on the right in the individual space is really important part of the value proposition that the infrastructure investment provides, and the social return on investment it is, because the median household income for those people is $16,700 a year up the coast. What's really interesting, if you go back to the first models, this one here, the moana in the whenua is just the where, the infrastructure is the what, and all those folk up there, the whānau, the tangata whānau, the hapu, and the iwi, that's the tribes, the sub-tribes, are the who. So if you go back to that, the digital twin really is all of the information from the system of not just what it is, the assets, but who uses them and where they are and when they're applied. If looking at it even more globally, that's the biosphere, the anthrosphere, and the geosphere. And what we've kind of cottoned on to more recently, and literally where we're figuring out right now in my scratchings literally over the summer, is if you take it at its highest level and look at these things here, there's actually just 5 infrastructure elements. There's water, or water-related infrastructure. There is transport and transport-related infrastructure. There's buildings of types. There's energy. And then there's telecommunications, but that's all. So there's layers of different types of water. So you've got wastewater, stormwater, potable water. You've got flood control water, infrastructure. In transport, you've got trains, buses, roads, aeroplanes. So you can think if these are digital layers, then you can actually start stitching them together back in that kind of analytical derivations in a digital sense, or a digital twin. In the biosphere, you've got plants, you've got animals, you've got fungi, you've got chromistas, and you can actually build layers of information and connect those with infrastructure if you so wish to. And then, of course, in the geosphere, you've got land, air, and sea. So it's really possible to put all these things together. And what we've actually done is we've done that, and we've got multiple instances of worldviews across any one of those thematics, and we can stand up, because we have a really good understanding of the connections at the base level of location information, of infrastructure information, and also individual information, that it makes it very easy for us to build and analyze at pace and scale in the cloud these kind of insights that we seek with respect to the communities. That's me.
Well, you never cease to surprise Hayden, especially throwing up a Greek word to a Greek who had to look up Google to find out what it meant. Episteme. Thank you for that. Thank you for that challenge. So it's I'm really I've really enjoyed this session, and now what I'd like to do is to have all our presenters put their cameras on as we head into our panel session. And there's quite a few questions that have emerged. A few that I've noted down, some from our attendees and also from our other hosts online, the Jacinta. So just some rules around answering. I love everyone's passion, but I'm going to ask you, if you can, wherever possible, to maybe keep to a minute to answer your question. Otherwise, I may have to call the rambling card and get the shepherd's crook and drag you off. But you know, I don't want to diminish the importance of what you have to say and how you say it. We have a lot of questions and we want as many people to be able to respond to them as possible. So the first one, and I'm going to test my theory and this request that I've made to you, it's to each of you, and it comes from one of our attendees, and it's: how can the spatial and surveying industries nudge others towards supporting smart cities? So I'll start with Dr. Reid, as you were talking very passionately about the social interacts. How do you see the role of spatial and surveying industries to nudge others?
I think the short answer there, George, and we've talked about this at length in the past, you have to show people. Ultimately, you have to demonstrate the capability and the value proposition. People conceptually, it's hard to conceptualize this for some folk. So I'm a great believer in finding ways to build models, show people the value proposition, and then have like the second conversation after the understanding is had around what it means in their environments.
I love it. So far, my theory is working. Thank you, Hayden. Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks, George. I think that what's necessary is to translate whatever your desired outcome is to the language of the user. So put it into use cases, help them see it from the value from their perspective, not from yours.
Great. Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
Adam.
I suppose to add to the great responses so far, George, find the right people to nudge. Now, that doesn't say we exclude people, but there are sort of key stakeholders that we should focus our time and efforts on. And so good stakeholder mapping, mapping out the nudgies is, I think, an important task, and make sure we include everyone. But, there's ears that we can whisper in that sort of can help us with our journey.
I think that's just north of Brisbane too. Just so
yeah, that's right.
That's coming from the Kiwi.
Okay.
I definitely agree in that nudgy kind of for idea.
Well, we've now got a new term: map out the nudgies. Isn't that something that you can do, Craig?
Well, I think the other presenters have made it easier to comment. I agree with all of them, and I like the nudgy concept. With some of it, I think some of them have already started on the journey, and I think what they need from us is collaboration to support them. That they've identified they need the spatial aspects, but they need assistance from us where we have our expertise to allow them to utilize it and optimize what they're doing with it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Luke.
Yeah. A few things to add to everything else that's already been said is highlight the problem that people are facing in their day-to-day work, and really simplify it so everyone can engage with that problem. And similar to what else has been said, in solving that problem, what's the value there for everyone, and get everyone on board. And something that we've tried really hard to do is get support from the top, from the senior people in government or wherever you need to go, but also talk to the people who are actually doing it and work out how they can do it and support them.
Great, thank you. And look, Adam, I latched on to one of your comments about workability and what's involved in that. And look, the next question again is to the panel. You've all had some experience in dealing with policymakers, and I'm interested to know what was the defining moment that had policymakers get on board with the ideas that you were presenting. So I'm going to start with you, Craig.
Well, policymakers don't do technical speak. So to work with policymakers, you've got to do exactly what Jennifer talked about, which is to translate into something they understand. And predominantly, as Hayden talked about, they are focused on the social outcome. And so we have to convert our technical speak into the social outcome. And I was doing this just recently in a project that we're trying to get over the line, where until you break it down into something that they can understand in terms of the impact to the people they're working with, then you don't get their traction.
Thank you. Luke, what's been your experience?
Yeah, similar to Craig, but I guess with Victoria at least and other jurisdictions, and it's probably global, that are spending a lot of money on infrastructure, there's a lot of room to overcome that productivity curve. And I know a lot of people have heard that productivity in the civil infrastructure space is just below agriculture, and has been lacking, or been going backwards for probably 20 years. So that gives us a bit of a need for highlighting urgency, especially with that sort of spend. And if something's urgent, it's likely to be done today rather than put off to another future date. They're like nice to haves, but not urgent. So highlighting in terms of policy, the urgency of it, what it will mean, and effectively how it will deliver real savings for an infrastructure portfolio of that size, really important, and also lead to better outcomes.
Thank you. Thank you, Luke. Jen?
Yeah, so I haven't had the actual pleasure of changing the policy in the world from the entrepreneur perspective, but I want to just point out how critical it is for the policymakers to be aware of what's happening in the future sphere, so that policy isn't an anchor that stops change happening. It has to go in tandem. We have to understand that we all work together and all parts need to be brought in alignment for us to accelerate change.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Adam?
Oh, George, I probably pull in one of my US projects from a long time ago, where we were able to convince City of Portland to amend a particular part of a policy around district energy. And the convincing was successful because we were very, very clear and convincing, with the support of private sector beside us, that showed kind of, I don't want people to take this the wrong way, but to show how dumb the existing policy was, how it was resulting in, productivity decline, and the new proposition and the amendment supported by the private sector in that they were fully committed to then investing. So, one of those moments where it was just very clear that it was not good policy, certain amendments, better outcomes environmentally, and, oh, by the way, jobs and private sector investment kind of did the job. So I've had a couple of those along the way.
Oops, sorry, did the COVID thing again. Hayden.
I kind of cheated, George. You'll remember. I actually had the ear and the luck of having a really smart Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister at the time, Bill English, who really understood this. And when we wrote the data standards, metadata standards, I remember sitting in his room, and I'll play the commercial card for a second. Jennifer, you'll get this in 2 seconds. I said, how on earth can you really understand the financial position of the country if you don't understand the condition of the balance sheet? And when it came to infrastructure, that was a really big question. And I said, unless you can analyze it in the kind of way that we did back in the day, to give you a really deep understanding of long-term liability and intergenerational equity and the analytics that went alongside that, then it wasn't a hard sell. Bill English is a very smart man, and it took him like 3 seconds to get it, because on the global stage he's fully well known for the social investment analytics, which was going through his head and our country at the same time. So and once you've got somebody like that to champion it, then all hell can break loose, would be the way to put it. So just go for the big dog would be my answer.
Okay.
Yes, that's a big nudgy.
the biggest dog. And
Yes,
Adam, to your nudgy point before, if I could just quickly say this: what you really want is champions, isn't it? So I'll just throw that little ditty in there too.
Yes, yes. Well, I consider all of you champions for what difference that you make in your different communities, and that's what makes this conversation so great. So the next question, which is again to the panel, and this will probably, unless anything comes up from our attendees, this will probably see us out. We've talked a lot about technology. We've talked a lot about policy. We've talked cross-sectionally everything that we need to address to have healthy communities. So in your experience, what do we need from academia to prepare our up and coming leaders? And I'm not just talking about the kind of degree that they need to do or undergraduate degree, but right through to MBA level and doctorate level. What are the kind of outcomes we want for academia to present to us? Aidan, I'm going to start with you because I'm going to.
Well, I guess, George, you film it. Guys, I've recently finished my PhD, so that's like in the last 2 or 3 years. So I've kind of been living in that space in this odd sort of way. So I'll put that lens on it, shall I?
Yes.
I suspect, and I've said this in a few forums more recently, is that the way that New Zealand and Australia construct the relationships with the academic fraternity with respect to industry generally, and let's call the spatial industry one of those, there isn't a high degree of connectivity like you would see in Europe or America, where the universities are deeply connected to industry and the commercial sectors. So I think there's a bit of a rethink that's got to go on around tailoring the institutional arrangements within universities such that they really line up to the demands of the industry, in this case the spatial industry, and the capabilities and resources that reflect those requirements, because currently I'm actually pretty clear they don't. So and I think, to be fair, not just the spatial industry, but you might argue around ICT more generally, big data analytics, data scientists, spatial scientists, those sorts of things. They're a new breed of capability across the planet more generally, but definitely in our part of the world. So we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on this. And I think that's where you start, as you start in those institutions with those connections.
Thank you, Hayden. Luke, I'll go with you next.
Yeah, thanks, George. It is an interesting one, and we do have a few connections with academia. We're involved in, for instance, the Building 4.0 CRC, which with a few projects. But I'd say for the graduates coming out, it would be great to have more focus on how to communicate. So they do learn good technical skills, but there's, even with the consultants that we use, we often find their use of language and being able to translate things into plain English lacking. And so I know in government we have a huge focus on how to say things simply and with as minimal words as possible. Cut back on the rambling, but yeah, that's a huge focus. And also how to form and seek approval for value proposition, like how to work that through the different people. Like government's interesting. It's not like a private company, but it takes more effort to influence and get decisions made because of how it forms. In a private company, you just go to the boss and the boss's boss, and you can get that through, and you don't need to work the informal channels as much.
Okay, so communication is the key.
Yeah, and also working with other professionals, like understanding how to work with other professionals and what their role is on a project or an aspect, and how important that is as well. So not to diminish it.
Yeah. Thank you, Luke. Jen.
Yeah. Hey, what a great important subject, because academia is creating the innovations of tomorrow, right? So from experience, I'd have to say that the academia needs to not limit them. We can't just have siloed approach to knowledge, so that people don't say, well, I'm just a chemical engineer, so I don't know about this. We have to be able to be lifelong learners. And so academia needs to inspire the students to be like those lifelong learners. But we also have to make sure from a commercial point of view that the people that are working on academic projects have looked at the commercial competitors in the market and not just read the research papers. We really need to look at a financial outcome.
Thank you, Jen. And Adam.
George, probably just two issues that I think need to be solved somewhere. I don't think it's all on academia, but there's certainly heavy touch points there. From a smart cities perspective, there is and sustainable cities perspective, there's a chasm between the research report delivered and the policy making that happens in real life, right? There's just this chasm there. The second one is, from my personal view, a total lack of longitudinal research. I mean, it's 2022, and I still got to answer the question somehow: what is the value of smart cities? What's the ROI? What's the business case? The best I can still do today is cobble together a couple of Gartner reports here, a couple of case studies there. The green building world and that movement, in 2007, they published the report that said, this is the money, right? This is where the money flows. This is where it goes. This is the value back. It was a longitudinal study, and we just haven't done that for smart cities. So a couple of areas that we could certainly work on.
Thank you. So we can't see the forest for the trees, Adam.
Trees are good.
Yes.
Trees are good. Trees are great
are important.
cities. Yes.
Okay. Well, look, on that note, thank you. I want to acknowledge all our presenters for the time and effort that you've taken into your presentations, and also the considered way that you've responded to the questions. And I've really enjoyed this session. Thank you again. It was a great way to start the new year. I hope it's been a great experience for you as well, and also the people attending. So on that note, Jacinta, over to you to see us out.
Thanks, George. I too would like to thank all our presenters today for their inspiring words and their interpretation of the questions that we asked of them. I'd like to extend our thanks also to Charles Moscato, Brenton O'Rourke, Brenton McDonald, David Norris, Oscar K. Saris, Evan Quick and Ashley Fenton, who presented at our earlier presentations throughout last year. We're grateful also to our audience for logging in early this morning and appreciate those who have stuck with us for the journey. This is our fourth and final presentation, but we also welcome those who joined us for the first time today. You will all be sent a link to the recording of today's presentation in the next day or two. So while this is the final instalment of our VDAS breakfast series, we're pleased to offer our next series of events, which will be a lunch and learn webinar session for current CEBA members. There'll be 45-minute sessions with roundtable discussions. We are looking to set up one for mid-February on Victoria's Big Build. So keep an eye out for more details on that, and we look forward to seeing many of you there. And finally, just before we wrap up, just a quick reminder that events like this don't just happen. There is no magic fairy. So thanks to our organising team of Fran, Heather, Dan and George, who have worked tirelessly to put together this presentation today and the earlier webinars. So thanks to all involved for a smooth session of webinars. Much appreciated and a job well done. So on that, I'd like to thank everyone, wish you a great day and request that you all find a way to use the word nudgies in a sentence today so we can make it viral. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye
Jacinta.
now. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.